All right. Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're traveling back in time, all the way back to ancient Greece.
And no, we're not talking about tobas and temples, though I'm sure those are fascinating.
Definitely fascinating. But we're diving into the world of ancient Greek philosophy. We're cracking open Nigel Warburton's A Little History of Philosophy.
We'll be hanging out with some of the biggest names in the game, the OG thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These guys were wrestling with questions that still blow our minds today. Questions about truth, knowledge, reality, you name it.
Exactly. They set the stage for, well, pretty much everything we talk about when we talk about Western philosophy.
Well, Biggie, so where do you want to start? With, the wisest dude in Athens, according to some.
Oh, you mean Socrates? Yeah, let's start there. He was kind of a rebel, right? The philosophical equivalent of that friend who always plays devil's advocate.
Totally, but in a good way. He wasn't just trying to be difficult. Socrates was obsessed with uncovering truth. He believed that the unexamined life, it just wasn't worth living.
I can get behind that.
Yeah.
So how did he go about, shaking things up? I mean, he didn't have a podcast, did he?
Imagine this. You're strolling through the Athenian marketplace, right? And you bump into this...
That's pretty refreshing, especially in a world where everyone's trying to be an expert on everything. Okay, so that's Socrates in a nutshell. Question everything, embrace your ignorance.
Right.
But then there's his student, Plato, who took these ideas and, kind of went to town with them, right?
Yeah, Plato was like, hold my beer, Socrates. He took this whole questioning thing to a whole other level.
Okay, so what was Plato's deal?
Buckle up, because this is where things get a little trippy.
Yeah.
Plato believed that the world we experience with our senses, the world we see, touch, taste, smell, hear, it's not the real world.
Okay, whoa, slow down there. You're losing me.
Yeah.
If this isn't the real world, then what is?
Plato called it the realm of forms. Imagine, perfect, unchanging concepts. Things like justice, beauty, truth. Those forms are the true reality, according to Plato. And everything we experience in this world, it's just a shadow, a reflection of those perfect forms.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this straight. It's like we're all stuck in a movie theater, watching shadows on a screen. But the actual movie projector, the source of those shadows, that's the realm of forms.
You're getting it. But here's the catch. We can't directly access those forms with our senses. Plato thought we could only grasp them through reason and thought, through philosophy.
So how do we break free from the movie theater of our senses? Do we need, a philosophical 3D glasses?
In a way, yeah. Plato believed that through deep thinking, through philosophical dialogue and questioning, we could train our minds to see beyond the shadows, to glimpse the true nature of reality.
So it's like a mental workout, but instead of building biceps, you're building, philosophical insight.
Exactly. And speaking of working things out, Plato had some pretty strong opinions on government, too. He wasn't exactly a fan of democracy, was he?
That's putting it mildly. Didn't he have this whole idea about philosopher kings?
Oh, yeah. In his ideal republic, forget about politicians and generals. The most qualified rulers would be philosophers, the people who had spent their lives pursuing wisdom and truth.
So it'd be like, sorry, Mr. President, gotta go. Plato says it's my turn to rule now. I can see why that idea never really caught on in the real world. It's a lot of pressure to put on us philosophy nerds.
Right. Imagine a world where the entrance exam for political office is a philosophy exam. Talk about a different kind of campaign strategy. But anyway, moving on. From the mind-bending world of forms to someone a bit more grounded, Aristotle.
Ah, Aristotle. Plato's most famous student. He was a bit more of a facts on the ground kind of guy, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Less concerned with the shadows and more with the stuff casting the shadows.
Exactly. Aristotle was all about observing the natural world, collecting data, categorizing everything. He was like the original polymath, studying everything from ethics and politics to biology and physics.
This guy literally wrote the book on logic, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, literally wrote the book. It's still studied today.
And let's not forget about the Lyceum, the school he founded. Imagine the original university, with students from all over flocking to hear him lecture and debate. Aristotle's impact on Western thought, it's massive.
It's true. But didn't his influence also have, a bit of a downside? Didn't his ideas end up holding back scientific progress for a while?
That's the irony. See, Aristotle was so brilliant, so influential, that his writings became the authority for centuries. So even when his ideas were wrong, his theory that the Earth was the center of the universe...
People just took it as gospel truth for, way too long.
Exactly. Which goes to show, even the smartest people can be wrong, and it's dangerous to accept anything blindly, no matter the source.
A valuable lesson for, any era, really.
So we've talked about Socrates and his whole question everything thing, and Plato with his mind-bending forms. Then there's Aristotle, the OG scientist, categorizing the world around him. But ancient Greek philosophy, it wasn't all about those big three. There were other schools of thought, other perspectives on the big questions.
Right, like, what about the Stoics? They're having a bit of a moment these days, aren't they? I feel like every other self-help book I see is like Stoicism for modern life or something.
Yeah, Stoicism is definitely having a resurgence. But their ideas, they go way back to ancient Greece. They were all about mastering your emotions, finding inner peace in a chaotic world.
Okay, so less about trying to control the world around you, more about controlling how you react to it.
Exactly. The Stoics believed that virtue, living in accordance with reason, was the key to happiness. No matter what life throws at you, loss, pain, even death, you could find tranquility by focusing on what you could control, your own thoughts and actions.
That's a pretty powerful idea, especially in a world that often feels, well, kind of out of control. So who are some of the Stoic all-stars?
Seneca was a big one, a Roman philosopher actually, but very much influenced by the Greek Stoics. He wrote about facing adversity with courage and accepting what you can't change.
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
Right. But I get it. It's like that serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
Right. Or there's this great Seneca quote. He says, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality."
Yeah. Our brains can be our own worst enemies sometimes. Okay. So the Stoics were all about inner peace. What about the skeptics? They sound a bit more, well, skeptical.
You could say that. If the Stoics were team inner peace, the skeptics were team question everything. But like on steroids, they were skeptical about whether we could ever really know anything for sure.
Okay, so not exactly a bunch of true believers then.
Not so much. The most famous skeptic was this guy named Pyrrho. He took skepticism to, well, kind of an absurd level. Legend has it that Pyrrho wouldn't even move out of the way of a charging chariot because he wasn't sure it would actually hit him.
Whoa, that's some next-level skepticism right there.
Right.
I guess when you doubt everything, even a runaway chariot doesn't seem like a big deal.
Right. I mean, obviously, most people wouldn't advocate for that level of detachment, but the skeptics, even if they took it to an extreme, they raised a valid point. A lot of what we think we know is based on assumptions, on shaky ground.
True. And sometimes it's healthy to question those assumptions. All right, so we've got the Stoics, masters of chill, and the skeptics, professional doubters. What other flavors of ancient Greek philosophy are we missing?
Well, we've got to talk about the guys who wrestled with those big, timeless questions about faith, reason, free will, Augustine of Hippo and Boethius.
Okay, so less about how to live your best life here on Earth and more about, like, the ultimate nature of reality, the meaning of existence, all that heavy stuff.
Exactly. Augustine, he's a giant in Christian theology, but he started as a bit of a wild child, philosophically speaking. He flirted with Manichaeism.
Manichaeism. Refresh my memory. What's how again?
It's this ancient religion, dualistic light versus darkness, good versus evil, constantly battling it out for control. Later, Augustine converted to Christianity, but he never stopped grappling with the big questions. Like, if God is all-powerful and all-good, then why is there so much suffering in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people?
Yes, the age-old question of evil. I think we've all pondered that one at some point, haven't we?
Right. It's a real head-scratcher. And Augustine's answer, in a nutshell, it's complex, but basically he argued that God gave humans free will, and that free will, it allows for the possibility of evil, of choosing wrong over right.
So it's like God could have made a world where everyone was perfectly programmed to be good, but would that even be real goodness then? Or would it just be like robotic obedience?
Exactly. It's like if you're forcing someone to be good, where's the moral value in that? Now, Boethius, he was dealing with pretty heavy stuff too. Imagine this. You're wrongfully imprisoned, falsely accused, sentenced to death.
Okay, that took a dark turn. But keep going.
And in your prison cell, you start pondering the nature of fate, free will, the existence of God. That's what Boethius did. In his book, The Consolation of Philosophy, he wrestled with this idea of God's foreknowledge. If God knows everything that's going to happen, past, present, and future, does that mean we have free will? Or is our fate predetermined?
I mean, if God's already seen the whole movie of my life, does it even matter what choices I make? It's like he's already spoiled the ending.
Right. But Boethius, he argued that God exists outside of time. So it's not that God is looking ahead at some fixed timeline. He sees all moments at once, but that doesn't mean he's dictating our choices. We still have the freedom to choose, even if he knows what we'll choose.
Okay, so it's like God's watching the whole cosmic movie marathon, but we're still the ones writing the script, even if he's already seen it.
You got it. And speaking of grand designs and whether or not they point to a divine creator, let's talk about Anselm, Aquinas, and their attempts to prove God's existence using logic.
Okay, so they're trying to take something as big and mysterious as God and cram it into a logical box. That seems ambitious.
It was. Anselm's ontological argument, it's all about defining God into existence. He starts by saying, imagine the greatest being possible. Then he argues that a being who actually exists is greater than a being who only exists in your imagination. Therefore, God, the greatest being possible, must actually exist.
It's like that saying, fake it till you make it, but for deities.
Kind of, but critics were like, hold on, you can't just define something into existence. Just because you can imagine a perfect pizza doesn't mean it magically appears on your doorstep.
Preach. Now, Aquinas, he took a different approach, right?
Yep, he looked for evidence of God in the natural world. His 5 ways, these arguments for God's existence based on observations about cause and effect, motion, design in the universe. Like his first cause argument, it starts with the premise that everything has a cause.
Right, like the domino effect. You gotta have that first domino to set the whole chain reaction in motion.
Exactly. And Aquinas argued that if we keep tracing that chain of causes back, we eventually arrive at an uncaused causer, something that set everything else in motion. And that uncaused causer, according to Aquinas, well, that's God.
So it's like who or what caused the Big Bang? What caused the causer? It's enough to make your head spin.
Right. But just because something initiated the universe, does that mean it's the God of the Bible, the God that people worship?
It's a good question. And it brings us to the heart of the debate between faith and reason.
And that's a discussion for the ages. Speaking of which, how about we shift gears from the divine to the domain of power, politics, and a guy who basically wrote the book on being ruthless. I'm talking about Niccolo Machiavelli.
Ooh, Machiavelli. Now there's a name that's practically synonymous with cunning and ambition.
Okay.
All right, so we left off with Machiavelli, a guy who wasn't afraid to play a little philosophical hardball. But the game of ideas, it never stops, does it? So who's next on our philosophical all-star team?
Well, if Machiavelli was all about the art of power, our next thinker, Thomas Hobbes, he was all about what he saw as the necessity of power.
Okay, so what was Hobbes' deal? Was he like a ruler himself? King Hobbes, the first of his name.
Not quite a king, but he did have some strong opinions about how society should be run. See, Hobbes, he lived through some pretty turbulent times in England, civil wars, revolutions, the whole shebang, and it kind of colored his view of human nature. Let's just say he wasn't exactly a starry-eyed optimist about humanity.
So what did he think? That we're all basically bad to the bone?
Well, he wouldn't have put it quite like that. But Hobbes believed that at our core, humans are driven by this primal urge for self-preservation. We want what we want, and we'll do whatever it takes to get it.
Sounds a bit like every man for himself. Not exactly a recipe for a harmonious society, right?
Yeah. Hobbes imagined a world without rules, without any kind of government or social structures to keep us in check. He called it the state of nature. And let me tell you, it wasn't pretty.
Okay, so take me a picture. What did this state of nature look like? Was it like a Mad Max dystopia, but with less hairspray and more philosophy books?
Not far off. Hobbes described life in the state of nature as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Basically a constant struggle for survival where everyone is suspicious of everyone else, and there's no such thing as justice, fairness, or cooperation.
Yikes, that sounds exhausting. So what's the escape route from this Hobbesian nightmare?
Hobbes believed the only way out of this chaotic free-for-all is through a social contract. Basically, we agree to give up some of our individual freedoms, some of our natural rights, in exchange for the security and order provided by a powerful sovereign, a ruler, a government, something like that.
So it's like a trade-off. We surrender some freedoms in exchange for protection and stability. I mean, that's kind of how society works, right?
Exactly. Think about it. We stop at red lights, even when there's no traffic. We pay taxes, even if we don't love everything the government does with our money. We follow laws, even if they're a bit inconvenient. Because deep down, we understand that these rules, even if they constrain us, are what prevent society from descending into chaos.
Like, I might want to blast my death metal at 3 a.m., but my neighbors probably wouldn't appreciate that. So we have noise ordinances. It's a social contract of sorts that keeps the peace. But didn't Hobbes' ideas also, freak some people out? Weren't they a bit radical for their time?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Critics argued that putting too much power in the hands of a single ruler, even in the name of order, well, It's a slippery slope to tyranny.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? How much freedom are we willing to sacrifice for security? It's a question we're still grappling with today. But speaking of grappling with big questions, let's talk about Descartes. He's the one with the whole "I think, therefore I am" thing, right?
One and only. René Descartes, he's like the poster boy for modern philosophy. He wanted to find a solid foundation for knowledge. Like, how can we be sure of anything, especially when everyone's got a different opinion about, well, pretty much everything?
Okay, so how do you go about finding certainty in a world where everyone and everything seems uncertain? It's enough to make you want to crawl under a rock and just eat Cheetos all day.
Right. But Descartes wasn't about to give up that easily. He came up with this method of doubt. Basically, he decided to systematically doubt everything he thought he knew. He was like, if I can find something that can't be doubted, then that's got to be the bedrock of truth.
Okay, I'm listening. So how do you doubt everything into existence?
Well, Descartes realized that even if he was being deceived by an evil demon, even if all his senses were lying to him, there was still one thing he couldn't doubt. The fact that he was doubting in the first place.
So even if everything is an illusion, the very act of thinking, of doubting, proves that I, the thinker, the doubter, must exist.
You got it. And that, my friend, is the essence of Descartes' famous declaration. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
It's actually kind of an empowering idea when you think about it. Like, no matter how much the world tries to deceive me, no matter how much doubt creeps in, I can always be certain of my own existence as a thinking being.
Exactly. And Descartes, he didn't stop there. He used this foundation of I think, therefore I am, to try and prove the existence of God, the external world, all sorts of stuff.
Ambitious. So basically, Descartes started with himself and tried to build his way up to the entire universe.
Pretty much. Now, not everyone agreed with his conclusions, of course. But Descartes' emphasis on reason, on logic, on the power of the individual mind, it was a game changer.
It's like he laid the groundwork for a whole new way of thinking about the world and our place in it. Okay, so we've gone from doubting everything to proving our own existence. What other philosophical rabbit holes do we have time for today?
Well, how about we explore the slippery nature of reality itself with John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume. These guys, they weren't content to just accept the world at face value. They wanted to know, what is reality really made of? And how do we know that our perception of reality actually matches up with actual reality?
Okay, those are some seriously big questions. So who wants to take a crack at them first?
Let's start with Locke. He was all about empiricism, the idea that knowledge comes primarily from our sensory experiences. We're born as blank slates, and it's through our interactions with the world, through our senses, that we build up our understanding of reality.
So it's like we're all born as empty hard drives, and then life starts installing software experiences, memories, ideas.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Locke also had this fascinating theory of personal identity. He believed that what makes you over time, what creates this sense of a continuous self, it's not the physical stuff of your body, but your consciousness, your memories, your experiences.
So you're saying that if, hypothetically, someone could somehow transfer my consciousness into a different body, like upload my brain into a robot or something, that robot would essentially still be me.
That's the gist of Locke's argument. It's your unique stream of consciousness that creates a continuous self, not the physical shell you happen to inhabit.
Okay, that's one way to achieve immortality, I guess.
Yeah.
Body swap your way through eternity. But where does Berkeley fit into all of this? Wasn't he the one who thought that? Like, reality is all in our heads?
You're on the right track. Berkeley took Locke's ideas about experience and pushed them even further. He argued that if all we can ever know are our own perceptions, then how can we be sure that a material world, a world independent of our minds, actually exists?
It's like that whole, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound thing? But Berkeley's taking it to a whole new level.
Exactly. He's basically saying, if there's no mind around to perceive that tree, does it even exist? Berkeley's famous for his immaterialism, this idea that reality, as we experience it, is essentially a mental construct. To be is to be perceived, as he put it.
Okay, I'm going to need a minute to process that one. Locke says reality is grounded in our experiences. Berkeley says it's all in our heads. Where does that leave Hume in all of this?
Well, if Locke and Berkeley were trying to figure out the nature of reality, Hume was like, hold on, how can we even be sure we know anything at all? He was the ultimate skeptic, questioning everything from our ideas about cause and effect to the very notion of a stable self.
Okay, so Hume's like the party pooper of philosophy, always raining on everyone's metaphysical parade.
You could say that. But Hume, he wasn't just trying to be difficult. He genuinely believed that skepticism, that questioning everything we thought we knew, was the only way to arrive at any kind of truth, or at least to avoid clinging to comforting illusions.
So Hume's like, sure, we might not be able to figure out all the answers, but hey, at least we can be honest about how much we don't know.
Exactly. He was all about embracing uncertainty, recognizing the limits of human knowledge, and you know what? That's not a bad place to leave things.
I agree. I think we've all earned a philosophical palate cleanser after that whirlwind tour through the history of ideas.
We've journeyed from the bustling marketplaces of ancient Athens to the depths of the human mind. We've questioned everything from the existence of God to the nature of reality itself.
And if this deep dive has taught us anything, it's that the big questions, they don't have easy answers.
But that's the beauty of philosophy, isn't it? It's not about memorizing a bunch of right answers. It's about asking questions, being curious, and embracing the mystery of existence.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep those philosophical gears turning. You never know what mind-blowing ideas you might discover.